Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 100. That's right, the century of events at the Apex. I'm not sure how many people are going to celebrate this, to be honest. Like I've always said, I don't mind one a month at the Apex. I think it comes with some good, unusual aspects to it, such as being able to hear the corners, being able to hear the strikes, the small cage. But yeah, look, I think I speak on behalf of all MMA and UFC fans that, 3 of them a month is a little bit too much. But look, the one thing we've all got to thank for the Apex, let's not forget that the Apex was born due to the global pandemic, the COVID era, where there was no sports happening at all. No football, no American football, no rugby, no tennis, no nothing. The only sport that was continuing was MMA, and that wasn't even MMA as a whole. That was the UFC. That was Dana White, and they were able to do that in one of, I think some people would regard it as a really dark time in our era, and it was able to go ahead. We were able to have UFC fights because of the Apex. That was, the Apex and Dana White were the only reasons why during the global pandemic we still got to watch the sport that we loved, the promotion that we loved. So yeah, like I say, it's a double-edged sword. We've absolutely got the Apex to thank for some great times during dark times, and now it just seems like it's maybe a little bit too much. Next year they have said they are going to cut back on them a little bit, which is good. So yeah, all in all, we're on a century of events at the Apex, and we've got another card to break down here. But just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for everybody, whether you're a fun gambler that wants to long shot parlays, to create your own parlays, or to have pre-built parlays. We've got a long-term gamblers section with full written breakdowns. We've got the official bet section that has my official bets, where my money is going on every single event. And then, of course, all of our subscriptions are included with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC fight. And that's all under one subscription. It's super affordable. We don't like to charge too much because our ethos, as I always say, is to make sure that you are earning your money back from the subscription that you've spent, so you can start profiting as quickly as possible off the bets that you make. So everything's super affordable, everything's all inclusive in the subscription packages. You've just got to choose your length, whether you want one event, want to pay monthly, or want to take advantage of our annual subscription at just $99. Everything is all in one place, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. And that's the introduction out of the way. That's the promotion out of the way. Let's get into breaking some fights down. And of course, we start as always with the main event. We've got Neil Magny versus Carlos Prates. Now, Carlos Prates is a fighter that is currently undergoing the gatekeeper test in Neil Magny. Neil Magny has these types of fights all the time. It's almost like an unassigned role that he's fell into. Neil Magny's now fighting the guys that are up and coming. If you can pass Neil Magny, then, welcome to the rankings. You've got a bright future ahead of you. If you don't pass the Neil Magny test, then it's back to the drawing board. Maybe you never hit the rankings. Maybe you do. Maybe you just have to, like I say, go back to the drawing board, refine a few things, come back and try again. But Neil Magny is absolutely the gatekeeper type of fighter in this division if you want to progress into the rankings. And he's that type of fighter for a reason. He's got tons of experience. He's super well-rounded. He's a good striker. He's a good wrestler. He's a good grappler. And if you're not on your game, and if you try and do anything that you think Neil Magny's not seen before, which the likelihood is he has seen before, then he's going to get the better of you. However, Neil Magny is also super beatable for the right opponent as well. And I kind of feel, look, I think if you go back, just before I was about to say what I was going to say, I think if you go back to look at all these prospects that Neil Magny's fought, you're probably going to find that myself and, a lot of other people will always predict against Neil Magny. And that's not going to change here because, look, like I say, the thing is, although Neil Magny's a veteran, although he's so good everywhere, he's seen it all, he's done it all, you're not going to show him anything that he's not seen before. The bottom line is he is absolutely beatable at this level in the UFC. And that's not saying he's a bad fighter. That's just saying that if you do stick to your guns and if you are that real prospect, you are going to beat Neil Magny. And I think Carlos Prates is that. And that's the bottom line of it. I think that Carlos Prates, look, he's long, he's rangy, he's got good striking, he's got good power, but not just the good striking, it's the variance of where he attacks. So he'll rip to the body, he's got body shot finishes. So he'll rip to the body, he'll rip to the head, he'll chew your legs up. His kicks are insanely fast, powerful, accurate. His strikes are super sharp, straight down the middle, Muay Thai base, doesn't overexert himself, manages his cardio and his energy really well throughout the fights. I think that'll help him in a 5-round fight as well, which is, of course, what he's got here. So he's not one of these fighters that's going to rush out the block, go super hard rounds 1 and 2, normally because he's only in a 3-round fight, but then really get stuck against the experienced veteran 3, 4, and 5. I don't think that's the case. I think Prates will manage his energy really well. It wouldn't shock me to see him get tired with it being his first 5-round fight should the fight go that long. Like, if we're seeing at the end of the 4th round that Prates is a little bit spent and he's worked hard and he's got this experience of 5 rounds in the bag, and then suddenly he's slowing down rounds 4, maybe, not looking as sharp, and then maybe he drops around 5 to the experienced veteran that's Magny. But I just think the work that he's going to do early in this fight, especially in the first 3.5 rounds, I don't even know if it goes into the 4th round. I think Prates could actually get Magny out of there. I genuinely think Prates is a real problem in the division. I think, like I say, his striking's good. Where Magny is going to have success in this fight, where he needs to be able to get hold of Prates and take him down, I think the wrestling and the grappling aspect, we just haven't seen enough of it, of Prates, from a defensive wrestling and grappling perspective to sit here right now and say that he's going to be absolutely fine if Magny starts to wrestle and grapple him. But what's going to be difficult for Magny is actually closing that distance, because Prates is a sniper with the strike, so Magny's going to have to walk through fire to get to Prates. Also, Magny hits a lot of his takedowns within the clinch as well, where Prates is super dangerous there. He's got dangerous elbows, he's got dangerous knees, his Muay Thai game's good. So again, there's going to be a lot of fire for Magny to go through to get the fight to where he's probably safest. And that's, in my opinion, what creates a really dangerous fight here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlos Prates to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a really interesting fight here from an analytical perspective. We've got Cody Garbrandt versus Miles Johns in the co-main event. And this is one of the fights that I'm definitely more intrigued about than the rest of the card. And the reason being is, look, Cody Garbrandt, of course he was, he's a former champion. It's so disappointing actually that he's just, he came in there against Dominic Cruz as the title challenger. At this point, Dominic Cruz was almost unbeatable. Like, it was so hard to, he was a phenom. It was so hard to beat. And then because he's so hard to beat, he was able to get his game going. But then Cody Garbrandt comes in there against him and absolutely styles on him. He doesn't just beat him and take the belt from him. He absolutely styles on him. He plays with him. He drops him a couple of times as well. Like, it's probably in the top 3 best single performances that I've ever seen in mixed martial arts in my life. And, that's up there with, I think the number 1 that springs to mind, as I think when it was Max Holloway that fought Calvin Kattar, like, that was just like a mind-blowing performance. But so was Garbrandt and Cruz. It was a mind-blowing performance. Like, I know that some people predicted Garbrandt to win, but I don't think anybody anticipated the fight to play out in that way. But unfortunately, since then, Garbrandt's just never looked or even got close to that level of performance. Like, knocked out twice against TJ Dillashaw and knocked out a bunch of times, actually. Like, Garbrandt I don't know what went wrong with him, but he just lost his head. He was brawling in fights where he shouldn't be brawling, leaving his chin wide open. He was just getting chin checked and caught by fighters at the highest level. But that's actually a really key point here, because the fighters that Garbrandt loses against are fighters at the highest level. Now, what makes this fight so interesting is, a lot of people, maybe including myself, have written Garbrandt off over the last few years and, haven't put too much stock behind him because of the fact that, it's low fight IQ with the brawling, and then it's got the chin issues. But actually last time out against Deiveson Figueiredo, who by the way is a former champion himself, albeit in a different division, is powerful, is fast. Like I say, got knockout power, absolutely, super aggressive. Garbrandt went in there against Deiveson Figueiredo and beat him in round 1, striking on all 3 judges' scorecards. Garbrandt looked outstanding for his defensively flawed and, from the fight IQ flaws that he's got as well, or he has had previously. His offense has always been world class. He's a super slick boxer. He's fast. He's powerful. He puts combinations together. Like I say, he's super quick and super powerful himself. And he showed that against Deiveson Figueiredo, and he actually took some hard shots from Deiveson Figueiredo as well, which is actually a good look for him, because now we're thinking, well, now he can fight smart. He can still take a punch when he's not brawling. So as long as he doesn't get into your brawl, he's actually a really technically good fighter. And then in comes Miles Johns. Miles Johns is on an absolute, shredding streak right now. He's looking great in his fights. He's got big power in his punches. He's winning. And that's the key part. Miles Johns is a fighter that is on his way up. He's doing well. He's winning his fights. The difference between Johns and Garbrandt, though, is the level of competition. Like, Miles Johns isn't fighting your Deiveson Figueiredos. Miles Johns is fighting, your mid-tier UFC fighters in the division. So this is a step up in competition for Miles Johns. It's a step down in competition for Garbrandt. And for me, it comes down to, does Garbrandt make a silly mistake and go to brawl with Miles Johns? Because, look, the thing is with Johns, with his striking, he's got big power. He throws big overhand right hands, and he's got a good hard left hook as well. So if Garbrandt gets into a brawl with Johns, if Johns is just smart and covers up and picks and chooses when he's landing the counters in the exchanges, then he's probably going to be able to knock Garbrandt out. But if Garbrandt doesn't get into that brawl with Miles Johns, I think he outvolumes him. I think he's faster than him. I think he puts combinations together, which is, again, like when you look at the numbers of volume, it'll tell you that Miles Johns technically statistically lands more shots and more strikes per 15 minutes than Garbrandt. But when you actually watch Johns fight, it paints a different picture, because Johns does throw a lot of volume, but they're all single shots. And against somebody like Garbrandt, I just don't think that's going to be enough. I think the single shots against Garbrandt is easy for Garbrandt to deal with. I think Johns' best chance is either putting volume together, in combinations, but that's not his style. That's something we've never seen before. Like, look at Trevin Giles last weekend. We all know that Trevin Giles needs to put combinations together and be more active. He just doesn't do it. Some fighters just don't. It's just not their style of fighting. And I think Johns is exactly the same. So Johns has either got to put the volume together that he never does, the combinations together that he never does, or bait Garbrandt into the brawl. And I think baiting him into the brawl is more likely out of the two scenarios. But I still think it's an unlikely scenario. I think if Garbrandt's styling on him and doing well, then I don't see Miles Johns having anything for him in regards to the striking, unless he does land clean with one of his overhand bombs. But again, I think Garbrandt's going to be okay with that, with the single shots. Like, he's still an elite striker. It's just, like I say, his head goes in the brawls. As long as he's not brawling, I think he's absolutely fine. Then Johns with the wrestling. Well, Cody Garbrandt's got a wrestling background. He's got decent grappling. We saw against Deiveson Figueiredo, who did eventually get the better of him with the grappling. Garbrandt's a high-level wrestler and grappler. Johns, I don't think, pushes the action too much from a wrestling perspective. So for Johns to win this fight, I think that he's either got to bait Garbrandt into a brawl, he's either got to fight or find the one-punch knockout if the brawl doesn't happen. And if neither of those happen, maybe Johns can, pin Garbrandt's back against the cage and grind him out. But again, I think that's a low percentage probability of allowing him to win the fight, because, Garbrandt's an experienced fighter. He's not just going to have his back against the cage for 15 minutes. So I actually think that, look, although both fighters are meeting each other at the right time, I don't think Garbrandt's done. I think Garbrandt's going to have a speed advantage, a power advantage, and as long as he doesn't get into the brawl, which I suppose is the big question, I think he's good here. So I'm going to take the chance of Garbrandt not getting into a brawl, and I'm picking Cody Garbrandt to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Denise Gomes. And I don't know what it is about this fight. It just screams Kowalkiewicz versus Andrade to me, except we might not have, a knockout quite as fun and entertaining. But I just think that, look, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, I know she was in a different time of her career. She was in a bit of a bad spot, losing streak, all that sort of stuff when she fought Andrade. And of course, she got knocked out. But Denise Gomes is very much like that version of Andrade. You know, she's aggressive, she comes forward, she throws big power, throws in combinations. She's not going to look too much for the wrestling. I think she'll be happy to stand in front of Kowalkiewicz and take what Kowalkiewicz has got to throw at her, if that means Denise Gomes is going to be able to get off on her own shots. And again, I think that Kowalkiewicz has had a great career resurgence, like 100%, like it's been amazing. She was on a massive losing streak. I think it was about 5 fights as well, between 3 and 5 fights. It was a sizable losing streak, and then to bounce back from that and come onto a win streak again, it shows a lot of character and, you know, a lot of mental toughness. But I do think that she's susceptible to losing fights against fighters that have got some power behind them and that are very aggressive and in your face. Where Kowalkiewicz does well is when she can be the little bit of the bully, although again, she doesn't have that typical bully style, but when she can be the one that's dictating the pace of the fight, dictating the range, then she can dictate the speed and use a movement and just point fight. When it's a point fight that's nice, that's at a good pace for Kowalkiewicz, where she can manage that distance as well, I think those are the fights where it's extremely difficult to beat her, because she is technically sound and she will throw volume. But when she's not the one that can dictate the pace, dictate the range, have things nice and point fighting type of style, that's when I think that she can be, you know, susceptible to be beaten. And I think that's where Gomes absolutely fits the bill here. Not sure I agree with the line being so wide, but like I say, historically Kowalkiewicz has had issues with the type of fighter that Denise Gomes is. So for those reasons, I'm picking Denise Gomes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ricky Turcios versus Bernado Sopaj. And this is actually a really entertaining fight that the UFC have put together. Sopaj, of course, you know, he was looking great in his UFC debut, and then he got hit with one of the knockouts of the year. And yeah, it was a bad knockout, and I'm glad that we've not seen him since that fight. So he's had, you know, a decent time to recover, you know, have that layoff, make sure that, you know, there's no longer lasting issues that, or any extra damage that gets incurred that probably, you know, sort of slows the career down, if you like, of Sopaj. So hopefully Sopaj is fully recovered, no long-lasting effects from the bad knockout, and then he can just continue his career, because he's a very, very good young fighter that I think has got a bright future ahead of him. And of course, Sopaj is fighting Ricky Turcios here. Now, Ricky Turcios is an entertaining fighter. He's definitely a character. He's someone that I think, you know, from a character perspective, fans can get behind. And at one point, he was looking super exciting in the UFC. But then his exciting style, it can be nullified. And when it's nullified, it can be beatable. And that's where we've sort of seen it with him. Like, you look at the Aiemann Zahabi loss, which, by the way, that Aiemann Zahabi loss has aged really good for Ricky Turcios, especially after last weekend. But Turcios was fighting Zahabi's fight. Like, Turcios wasn't his super ball of energy, you know, crazy style, you know, 100 miles an hour. It wasn't that type of performance. Turcios fought a pretty, you know, actionless fight. You know, it wasn't that entertaining, but it's exactly what Aiemann Zahabi wanted and what he needed to beat him. So that's the issue that I've got with Turcios. He can be exciting, he can be fun, he can be a ball of energy, but you can also nullify all the great aspects of his game that he brings into the cage. Now, with Bernado Sopaj's style is quite fast-paced, and, you know, it is a volume-heavy approach, and that could bring out the best in Turcios. I don't think it's going to be one of these fights that Turcios' exciting styles nullified. I think that Sopaj is going to bring the best out of Turcios, and that's what's going to make it a really good fight. It's just when you look at two fighters bringing the best out of each other and the fighting to the full potential, the winner is usually the fighter that's more technically sound, that's got everything put together a little bit better, both offensively and defensively, and that is, you know, more dominant in more areas in MMA. And I kind of feel that falls on the side of Sopaj. Definitely from a striking perspective, I think that Sopaj is well put together. I think that his striking's cleaner, it's crisp, he's got some power. Whether that power translates into these new gloves, which I think is going to be a feature on a lot of future episodes of the podcast, because apart from the Dustin Stoltzfus KO, last weekend, it's been really, really dry. But look, that's a conversation for a different day. But yeah, whether Sopaj's power carries over, we'll see. But I just think from a striking perspective, he's cleaner, he's more well put together. And then I think from a wrestling perspective, he's better. Now, what gets interesting here is the grappling. Now, I think that Turcios is a more difficult grappler to deal with, but Sopaj has got good grappling chops also. So I think as long as it's Sopaj on top of Turcios, I think Turcios won't make life easy down on the mat for Sopaj. But I also think Turcios could play guard a little bit here. I think Sopaj could get minutes on top of Turcios and just stay safe, but do good enough work to keep the fight on the mat and just rack up a lot of control time. So I kind of feel that when the fight's on the feet, it's going to be Sopaj. I think the more likely to wrestle is going to be Sopaj, and therefore Sopaj should have more success when it comes to the grappling aspect as well. And that's kind of where I'm leaning. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bernado Sopaj to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a newcomer into the UFC. We've got Gerald. Meerschaert, of course, isn't the newcomer, versus Reinier de Ridder. Now, Reinier de Ridder has come predominantly from one championship. He was a one championship champion over there. And there's a lot of hype on Reinier de Ridder. There's a lot of noise about him joining the UFC. I've obviously known about Reinier de Ridder for years. I've seen his name come up. I've seen that he's had some good performance, but I've never actually sat down and watched one of his fights until this week, until he signed for the UFC, and I've needed to tape it from a betting perspective. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know whether it's one of those situations that everybody hypes something up and then it doesn't quite live up to your expectation because you're expecting so much. Like, I give you a movie example, like Mad Max. Mad Max, it had like 99%, reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and everybody was raving about it like it was it was an outstanding film. And then when I actually sat down and watched it, I think I expected so much of it that I was left a little bit underwhelmed. Maybe that's how I'm feeling with Reinier de Ridder. I'm not sure, but yeah, like even watching tape on him, I'm not quite understanding the hype. And he's gonna win fights in the UFC, like definitely is that type of fighter. But I'll give you an example, like a flip example here. Like when the UFC signed MVP Michael Venom Page, that was a fighter I was excited to see in the UFC. That was hype that I was like, yeah, I'm absolutely behind this. But with Reinier de Ridder, not quite so much. I think it's a decent fight here stylistically, just in general in this fight with Gerald Meerschaert, because both fighters are predominantly grapplers. Both fighters have got unorthodox and I think somewhat underrated striking to go with it as well. And like I say, the grappling aspect of this fight is what fascinates me the most, because I love to see two grapplers get on the mat grappling and scrambling whilst also adding the extra punch to the face. I love that aspect of grapplers in MMA. So I'm hoping that we do see a lot of grappling here, but I kind of feel that if there is a lot of grappling, it's who's on top that's gonna matter, because I think whoever's on bottom could potentially get a little bit stuck with the fighter that's on top, because they're both good offensive grapplers. So I think that Reinier de Ridder, he's the more likely, in my opinion, that's going to end up on top of Gerald Meerschaert for two reasons. One, I wouldn't say his wrestling's massively better, but I think he's going to be the more willing wrestler in this fight, or maybe he pulls guard and sweeps in a scramble. So Reinier de Ridder's that type of grappler that I just feel that he's going to end up on top. The other side to this is I think de Ridder's going to be the better striker in this fight. And because he's going to be the better striker, in my opinion, I think that it's going to start to force Gerald Meerschaert to shoot takedowns, maybe somewhere a little bit desperate. And I think that de Ridder can sprawl, get around to the back. So I think from a dominant position perspective in the grappling, it's more likely to be Reinier de Ridder that's in these more dominant positions. And because of that, he should have the grappling upside in this fight. And then, like I've already said, from a striking perspective, look, Meerschaert's underrated, and he definitely does some good work to the body with the kicks. But I think Reinier de Ridder's been in there and dealt with way better strikers than Gerald Meerschaert. So I think the striking advantage is with Reinier de Ridder. I think the wrestling advantage is, I don't think there's so much of an advantage in the wrestling. It's just who's going to be the more willing And I think that Reinier Derrida is going to be the more willing fighter. Maybe it's not even the wrestling. Maybe it's the body locks and trips down to the mat. But I just think Derrida is going to be the fighter that's more likely to be on top. And I think Meerschaert is going to play a little bit off his back. He's going to hope that he can sweep and reverse. And I just don't know if the opportunities are going to be there, which will start racking up control time for Derrida. So, yeah, look, with everything described, I actually think it's an intriguing fight. Maybe the line, again, I don't think it should be that wide. But I do think that Derrida has got enough upside in this fight to get his first win on his UFC debut. And let's see, where he goes after that and the type of opponent he fights next. But as for this weekend, I'm picking Reinier Derrida to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Luana Pinheiro versus Gillian Robertson. Now, for me, it's a clear grappler versus striker type of fight, this. Although both can strike, both can grapple. And in fact, I actually think that Luana Pinheiro's grappling, the difference in the grappling is less than the difference in the striking. And what I mean by that, I think that Luana Pinheiro is who I'm classifying as the striker, by the way. Gillian Robertson's the grappler. Let me just clarify that. But I think that when you're looking at both fighters' weaknesses, I think Pinheiro's better as a weakness in the grappling than Gillian Robertson is in the weakness with the striking, if that makes sense. But you've got to look at whose offense is stronger. And I think that Gillian Robertson's offensive grappling is more likely to have an impact on this fight than Pinheiro's offensive striking. Because I'll tell you now, the second that Gillian Robertson feels a combination from Luana Pinheiro and feels that power, she's going to go straight to that wrestling and grappling. Pinheiro can be taken down, she can be nullified, as long as she's got the right opponent on top of her. And look, this might even be a difficult first round for Gillian Robertson because one of Pinheiro's strengths is a judo. So maybe if Robertson's not completing the double legs and she's driving Pinheiro's back to the cage, that's when Pinheiro can start to maybe use some tricky judo. But I don't think that she's going to be successful with that for an entire fight. And the cardio is also a big question mark for Luana Pinheiro, whereas Gillian Robertson, she'll wrestle and grapple all day. And I kind of feel that there is going to be some early moments for Pinheiro with the striking. Maybe she trips Gillian Robertson down to the mat. But I think even if she trips Robertson down to the mat and uses a judo, I think Robertson's going to either be able to a reverse position or sit up, get a hold of a single leg and re-wrestle and be able to get on top of Pinheiro. So I think stylistically it's a really tough fight for Pinheiro because essentially what I'm thinking is that she's probably going to have to finish Gillian Robertson early in this fight, and I just really don't see that as an outcome that happens more often than not, at all. I just really don't see that scenario playing out. I think that Robertson is going to survive any bad early moments and then just get a grind going, get the wrestling going, get the grappling going. And I think from then it's going to be a really long night for Pinheiro. Robertson might even get her out of there with a submission as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gillian Robertson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nicolas Dalby versus Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, that I will just call Elizeu Zaleski or Zaleski for the sake of this breakdown, just so I'm not increasing the podcast length by about half an hour just saying Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. But in regards to this fight, I think it's a super well-matched fight. I really like the fact that we've got two veterans against each other, that they're not both being put in situations where they're having to deal with, rampant, up-and-coming, hyper prospects, which, to be fair, Nicolas Dalby's took one of those out. Zaleski almost took one of those out in Fakhretdinov. Obviously, Dalby's was Gabriel Bonfim, who, that was just an insanely good performance. So, yeah, look, they're both, every dog has its day, and they're absolutely both able to beat these upcoming veterans, but I kind of like this fight. The only thing I was surprised about is they're actually the same age. I thought Dalby was so much younger than what he actually is, and, credit to him, he looks a lot younger than what he is. Whatever he's doing with his skincare certainly works. But yeah, look, it's a really well matched fight. I think from looking at the entire card perspective, I think it's the closest fight as well. It's definitely one of my least confident picks, but that's because they're so evenly matched. You look at the striking. Yes, Elizeu Zaleski's striking it's probably cleaner than Dalby's in regards to from a technical perspective, but Dalby's definitely efficient with his striking. again, there's a difference. Like Zaleski is more of a kicker, whereas Dalby's more of a boxer. So if it's out at range, it's going to be Zaleski. If it's in close, it's going to be Dalby. And it's who's going to be able to dictate the range in this fight, I think, is going to be the key aspect here. But then you look at the wrestling and grappling, and they're both probably predominantly strikers, but you would say Dalby's the more likely wrestler in this fight. But then Elizeu, Zaleski's got decent wrestling and grappling, especially from a defensive perspective as well. So I just think wherever you look across the board, they kind of cancel each other out, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the fight plays out. Maybe it's going to be one of those split decisions that we don't know which way it's going to go, but I kind of feel it's not going to be that. Like, even though it's so well matched and so close, I'm not 100% confident of which fighter's going to actually take the initiative here, take it to the opponent and win comfortably. But I do think we're going to get to the scorecards, and I think we're going to know who's going to win the fight. And like I say, I'm not sold on which fighter it is, but I kind of feel that I'm leaning more towards the Dalby side. I think Dalby maybe does have something extra to give. I do think that, he's aggressive and he'll come forwards, and I think when I said it all depends on the striking of who's dictating the range, I kind of think that's in Dalby's hands. It's up to Dalby. If Dalby decides to not close the distance, then he's going to lose the fight. So the thing is with Zaleski's got to be the one that's constantly pulling back, whereas Dalby's the one that gets to decide whether he stays back or comes forward, whereas Zaleski doesn't have that choice. And I just think because of that, Dalby's going to be able to be the fighter that dictates the range. Therefore, he probably has more success in the striking. But I think it's a close matched fight. It's definitely one of my least confident picks, but I am siding with Nicolas Dalby to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got newcomer Mansur Abdul-Malik versus the returning Dusko Todorovic. Now, I say returning because Todorovic, this is the first time we're going to see him till that freak injury that he sustained against Leroy Duncan. And yeah, look, it's going to be interesting to see how he's recovered from that. I'm assuming with the timeout that he's had, he's going to have recovered from it just fine. But he's got a real young, hungry bull on the opposite side of the cage against him here. Mansur Abdul-Malik. He looks the absolute part. He's huge. He's ripped. He's got a lot of muscle mass. You can tell that he's aggressive, that he likes to come forwards. He likes to throw heat with his hands. Again, you've got to factor in the gloves here. Like, I think he would be more of a monster with the old UFC gloves than the new UFC gloves. But with that being said, like, the dude, you can tell he's physical, athletic, and he hits hard. So Todorovic is definitely going to have to mind his P's and Q's in this fight. Now, the issue that I've got with Abdul-Malik is, and again, I talk about this a lot, he's coming off the Contender Series, he's 6-0, and the first 5 fights of his professional career ended with a first round knockout against opponents that didn't really have great records. So he was fighting a low level of competition and winning in round 1, which is fine. Like, you have to deal with the cards that you dealt, and he was dealt some weaker opponents and he had to deal with them accordingly, and he absolutely did. Then he goes into the Contender Series. Again, round 1, it looks like he's having a great fight. This time he's fighting a much better opponent than his previous level of competition. So he looks good in round 1, but then he goes to a round 2 for the first time, and then suddenly it's not as clean as what round 1 was, and you're thinking, well, it might be good enough to get him through this fight, and it is, and he does win in round 2, and that's great. But now he's in the UFC and he's fighting real opponents that have fought better level opponents than what Abdul-Malik is as a fighter. And Dusko Todorovic, he comes with his issues, like his defensive flaws. He has his chin out there. It's something that is very obvious to everybody. It doesn't take a genius analytic in mixed martial arts to spot that. But to be fair to him, he's only been KO'd twice. One was the Pinheiro Soriano KO, which was the KO that was always going to come because of his defensive flaws. The other one was Njokuani, but he got caught in close with an elbow, and I kind of feel that wasn't a result of the defensive flaws. So his defensive flaws have only caused him issues once in the UFC. So it's the thing is with Abdul-Malik, and again I go back to this, is how many times have we seen a fighter coming off the Contender Series that looks super green, which is what he is. He does look green. He's definitely in a big developmental stage where he's going to be improving rapidly from fight to fight, but it's going to take a few years, I think, for Abdul-Malik to really become a phenom in the UFC if he gets to that level. So he still looks green. He's 6-0. He's only been out of round 1 once, and the time he did come out of round 1, he didn't look as great as what he did in round 1, so there's a red flag there. And he's coming into the UFC. Look, he's a fighter that's green, that's still learning, that's still improving, and his first loss is around the corner. And it might be to a Dusko Todorovic that is experienced, that's fought better level of competition. Dusko Todorovic was also in that position in the UFC where, that first loss is going to come. He was green, he was still learning, and that first loss was around the corner, and he took it. And Todorovic has took another loss since then. So look, he's learning, but the thing is, he's fighting at a higher level than what Abdul-Malik is. Now, I think that when you look at both of them side by side, look, Malik's he looks like a monster. Like I say, athletic, physically big, but that doesn't win your fights. And Todorovic, in my opinion, is a more skilled fighter right now than Abdul-Malik. It's just he's not as athletic, he's probably not as fast and doesn't hit as hard. So what I'm thinking here is either Abdul-Malik takes Todorovic out of there in round 1, which is absolutely possible, but if he doesn't and Todorovic weathers a storm and Abdul-Malik starts to slow down, I guarantee we'll be sat there thinking, well, we've seen this a million times before. The guy that's never really been out of round 1, and when he has, he's looked spent against the experienced UFC fighter that's took losses that he's learned from in the UFC and fought better level of competition. We'll be sat there halfway through round 2 thinking, well, we've seen this before. And it'll be that loss that Abdul-Malik needs to take to learn from and comes back stronger. So I actually think it's going to play out like that. I'm not trusting these early knockouts with the gloves, although they're possible. I think Todorovic can weather a storm here, really break Abdul-Malik's cardio into round 2 and then take over the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dusko Todorovic to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Charles Radtke versus Matthew Semelsberger. And it's an interesting fight, this, because it's between two fighters that I've never been massively high on, if I'm being honest. I did bet Semelsberger last time out. I did buy into Semelsberger a little bit. I think he earned that, though. And look, Semelsberger's a dog type of fighter. He's got power, he's got early knockouts. He can wrestle, he can grapple. Like, he's big for the division as well. And with all that being said, and then he's a dog type of fighter that's got a no-quit attitude, that'll fight for your money. I did buy into Semelsberger eventually. I didn't initially, but I did eventually. And then Semelsberger got absolutely grinded out by Preston Parsons. Now, I don't think that's going to happen with Charles Radtke. It's a different type of fight. But my issue with Semelsberger now, and I'm mentioning the gloves once again, is that Semelsberger really relied on that power to win fights. Like, you look at when he beat Jake Matthews, that was a really good win. But he beat Jake Matthews because of multiple knockdowns. Like, he didn't knock him out, but he had so much power. And with the old UFC gloves, they seem to hit a lot harder. And he was able to drop opponents. And then it didn't really matter what else happened in that round, unless it's a Jeremiah Wells type of fight, which is, not gonna happen, too many times. Obviously, Jeremiah Wells was hurt, but then he managed to wrestle straight away and then win like 4 minutes of the remaining part of that round, of a 5-minute round. But Semelsberger was winning rounds because he was dropping his opponents, and it didn't really matter what happened after that. It could be a super close round, keep safe, he wins the round. But with these gloves, I'm just not convinced that he's going to be able to drop Radtke like he's dropped to other opponents. Give him the old gloves, I give him a chance. And the thing is, against Preston Parsons, if the wrestling wasn't a thing with Parsons, I think Semelsberger would have opened up more, and I think he would have hit and hurt Parsons. But the wrestling was there, so that was taking away some of, a lot of Semelsberger's game. But then when the fight was on the feet, Semelsberger was hesitant because he knows that the takedown's going to come. Whereas in this fight with Radtke, yes, Radtke can wrestle and grapple, but it's not predominantly his style. Radtke's got power in his hands and he likes to strike. And I think it's going to be a close fight. Like I say, if this was the old gloves, I'd be absolutely all over Semelsberger here, because I think Semelsberger would be able to drop Radtke. Radtke's not a fighter that I'm massively high on. I'm surprised there was so many people betting on Radtke against Carlos Prates, and I know that the line was somewhat wide and people were seeing value in Radtke, and that's fine, but I just didn't really give Radtke too much of a chance in that fight, and it showed. So, again, like I say, I know Radtke's got a skill set behind him. I'm just not massively high on him as a fighter, like I wasn't with Semelsberger. But maybe Radtke can win me over in a couple of fights. I'm always open to my mind being changed. However, I am actually picking Radtke to win this fight because I think for Semelsberger, he needs the knockdowns to win fights. And I think Radtke's defensive wrestling and grappling is going to be good enough to keep the fight standing. And then I just don't trust Semelsberger, like I say, to be able to score those knockdowns to steal the rounds. And if he doesn't have these knockdowns against Radtke, I think Radtke's going to be able to put good strikes together with combinations, and then I think Radtke might mix in some takedowns as well and have some top time against Semelsberger, because again, Preston Parsons played out, pretty much printed out a blueprint of how to beat Semelsberger in his last fight. So I think Radtke's going to be able to mix things up a bit. If it was the old gloves, I'd be picking Semelsberger because I think the knockdowns would happen, but because of that, I think Radtke's going to be more than game in this fight. For those reasons, I'm picking Charles Radtke to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cody Stamann versus Damon Blackshear. Damon Blackshear, I like Damon Blackshear as a fighter. Obviously, he's coming off that early KO loss against Montel Jackson. Sorry, I forgot the name then just for a second. But Montel Jackson, finished Blackshear very early in that fight. I really wish we'd have seen that fight play out a little bit longer. And I know it's a cliche type of thing to say because, Jackson showed that there was a reason why he finished him in round one. But if the fight had played out, I think Blackshear would have been able to have some good moments. And the thing is with Cody Stamann, I kind of feel that Stamann's style of fighting was great sort of 3 to 5 years ago. I don't think that the style has aged well in the UFC. I don't think he's developed on top of his game to be great and super competitive in this era of MMA with the likes of Blackshear in and around this level in the UFC. And because of that, I think that Stamann is going to slowly fall off a little bit. And it's a shame to say because he's always been a fighter that I've enjoyed watching from a technical perspective. But this boxing to wrestling, but then having no top control time and opponents being able to stand right back up to the feet is just something that doesn't score very highly. And then he's got Damon Blackshear that, look, Blackshear can be taken down, so I assume that Cody Stamann's going to take him down. But the thing is, once the fight hits the mat, Blackshear's grappling is so much better than Stamann's. So I don't think Stamann can hold him down. Or maybe if Blackshear doesn't want to stand back up, maybe he can sweep and reverse. But if that's not there, then the standing up isn't going to be an option for Blackshear. And then when it comes to the striking, I think Stamann might be the slightly cleaner boxer, but Blackshear's got good striking as well. I don't think that Stamann's got an edge in the striking. And I do think Stamann's going to wrestle, just like he does in pretty much every fight. And I do think he's going to get takedowns on Blackshear. But I just, like I say, that takedown, stand back up style doesn't really work unless you're a Merab Dvalishvili who can do it 10 to 15 times in a 3-round fight. And that's not Stamann's style either. It's sort of maybe 1 or 2 takedowns a round at most. But then if your opponent stands right back up, it's just considered as a change of position and they just don't score it at all. But I think if Blackshear wanted to take Stamann down, I think he could take Stamann down. And then I think we see a massive difference in the grappling. I think Blackshear can stay on top of Stamann. And then on the striking, I think Blackshear's dynamic enough to do good work there as well. So I think it's a bad stylistic fight for Stamann. Like I say, I think that Stamann's style just isn't great in this MMA era in regards to being able to be a round winner and taking minutes. And then his finishing has never been like a predominant aspect of how he wins fights either. So yeah, I think he's in a tough spot in general. And I do think that Blackshear is going to be the better fighter on the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Damon Blackshear to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Melissa Mullins versus Claudio Segula. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Oh, well, I don't think, I'm guessing. But yeah, Melissa Mullins versus Claudia Segula we'll go with. It's Claudia Segula making a UFC debut. Watch tape on her. What I think of her is, look, she's got some decent top control time from what I've seen. Like, she's not bad in a top position. She can remain somewhat heavy and keep her positions. But on the feet, I think she's relatively... I don't want to say sloppy, but her striking's not super clean. Like it's big winging hooks, and it's no more than 2 shots at a time. And her defense she's absolutely open to be hit while she's striking. Like a defense and opponents being able to counter her, I think is going to be a big issue for her. And I kind of feel Melissa Mullins is just going to have a way with her in this fight. Like, Melissa Mullins, her striking super aggressive. She'll be in your face. Her striking straight punches. It's not the winging shots that Segula lands. And I think while Segula's trying to land on Mullins, I think Mullins is going to be able to fire straight down the middle, use a Muay Thai striking style that she's got. And I think she's going to be able to land on Segula and hurt her, potentially even knock her out as well. I doubt with the new gloves it's going to be a one-punch knockout, but maybe an accumulation of damage. But then when you start to look at the wrestling and grappling, I think Segula might be able to take Mullins down, but if she does, I just don't anticipate her having the same amount of control on top of Mullins as she has done on the regional scene. I think Mullins will be able to get back to her feet. And then from Mullins' perspective, I think Mullins could, get a body lock and trip Segula down to the mat and do some good work on top of her. I just feel that right now Mullins is a slight level above Segula, and I think it's going to show. I think the striking's going to be better, and I think she's going to be more prominent in the wrestling and grappling as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Melissa Mullins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the People's Fighter here making his UFC debut. We've got Cortavius Romeus versus Gaston Bolaños. What a name that is, Cortavius Romeus. He looks the part as well, super athletic, ripped, physical, he's exciting, comes forward, throws heat. So yeah, I can understand absolutely why everybody's excited to see the debut of Cortavius Romeus. Now, he needed 2 attempts in the Contender Series, and we'll talk about the elephant. We'll get the elephant of the room out of the room straight away, because look, Cortavius Romeus, just like I said with Cody Garbrandt earlier, his willingness to brawl and the low fight IQ that comes with that is going to be his undoing until he fixes it. And I just don't know if he's going to fix it. Like, he came out in his first Contender Series fight, brawled like hell, went to war, and got dropped, I think, like 2 or 3 times before he was finished. And you're thinking, well, look, he's coming to try and impress Dana White. I get it. He wanted a contract. He wanted Dana White on his feet saying, holy shit, understand it. Then he comes back in his second Contender Series fight, and he starts off a little bit more patient, a little bit slower, and you're thinking, okay, learned his lesson, that's the sign of a good athlete, a good fighter. But then it's not too long before he starts entering a brawl again. The difference is in the second Contender Series fight, he was fighting someone who was predominantly a grappler and not someone that had an insane amount of power, so he could kind of get away with it, but he was still being tagged within the brawl. So you're thinking, not again, Romeus, don't do it again to yourself. And he did end up, getting the win. He did end up doing good work. But like I say, that low fight IQ is definitely a red flag with Romeus, and the fact that he's so open to be hitting the brawls. And the thing is, again, I'm going to say it one more time, the new gloves, I think if these were the old gloves, I think Romeus would be super dangerous, because it would only take one of his, explosive bombs to land. But I think that if opponents can eat these punches, if the gloves do hit softer and the opponents can eat these punches, then they're going to be able to find a counter on Romeus. And even though, again, the gloves are going to be softer for the opponent as well, if Romeus has been super aggressive coming forwards, he's already got that forward momentum against him once an opponent lands a punch on him, because that forward momentum is going to add impact to the shot. So, look, I think Romeus is a good fighter. Like, I also love his defensive wrestling and submission game as well. Like, he can defend takedowns, he's super good in scrambles, he's got arm bars and triangles off his back, and although they're not going to work too many times in the UFC, you can tell that he's got some good level with those arm bars and triangles. He's not just hitting them on fighters low level competition just because they're low level competition. You can tell that it's a skill set that he's got, so that's going to be interesting. Now, you've got Gaston Bolaños on the other hand. Now, I think this is a real problem for Romeus if Romeus comes in here and wants to brawl with Bolaños, because I think that Romeus is going to come forward and look to excite the UFC and try and put it on Bolaños. Now, Gaston Bolaños is a much better technical striker than Cortavius Romeus. Gaston Bolaños has got power. Again, the gloves hold me a little bit of a pause with that, but again, in the old gloves, I think Bolaños knocks Romeus out all day long here. New gloves, I'm a little less convinced, but still think that, look, Bolaños can hit hard. And we saw, like, these gloves, by the way, they don't have like a non-knockout function on them. Like we saw last weekend that Dustin Stoltzfus knocked out Marc-Andre Barriault cold. And Dustin Stoltzfus isn't known for those types of knockouts. And Barriault's known for being tough. So it was kind of a counter thing there. But yeah, look, in this fight, if Romeus comes out aggressive with Bolaños, I think he's going to be live to being knocked out here, because Bolaños has got good power and he's a very good technical striker. Where Romeus is going to get at Bolaños is with the wrestling and grappling. But again, Romeus, we don't see too much offensive wrestling and grappling out of him, at least not recently. So does he wrestle and grapple Bolaños, or is he more likely to enter into a brawl that Bolaños baits him into? Well, I think he's going to more likely end up in a brawl. The only way I think that Bolaños gets caught here is I think he gets caught out if he drops Romeus, doesn't knock him out and gets on top of him. Because although Romeus, like I say, at this level in the UFC, you're not going to hit too many arm bars and triangles, Bolaños has got a real flaw and a hole in his jiu-jitsu and his wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So this is actually a fight where I think Romeus could hit an armbar or a triangle if he's on his back. But it's just the willingness of Bolaños falling into the guard. I just don't think he's going to do it because he's predominantly a striker and he's not daft. He's going to have seen Romeus' fights and know that, you know, the armbar and the triangle is going to be potentially on in this fight. So I actually think this is a good fight for Bolaños. I see the line widening. More and more money's coming in on Romeus. I get it. He looks the part. He's got a cool name. He's shredded and he hits hard and he's super exciting. But inside that super exciting is a lot of holes and flaws that I think a striker of the quality of Bolaños can capitalise on. And that's kind of where I'm leaning on Bolaños. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gaston Bolaños to win this fight. And in the final fight to break down, we've got Trajan Gore versus Antonio Trocoli. Now, I've got some pretty strong opinions on this fight, actually, and I kind of feel like I'm stood on an island on my own. So if you are listening to this podcast and you agree with me, or maybe you disagree, which I'm sure many of you will, feel free to drop a comment onto the YouTube channel, onto the video, and yeah, drop a comment into the replies, and yeah, just let me know what your thoughts are. But the reason why I think I'm on an island of my own is because I think that Antonio Trocoli is much better than the MMA fans and the public are portraying him. I genuinely think that. Like, the Sharamagomedov loss, there's so much behind that, by the way. Like, he was supposed to fight Umar Sy. He pulled out of that fight for undisclosed reasons, but then he was booked to fight a month after, so I kind of feel like those undisclosed reasons were visa issues, and he just had a couple of weeks delay on that and couldn't fight on the card that he was scheduled to fight on. But then they put him on the card after, or the month after that, against Ikram Aliskerov. So then Trocoli comes to Vegas and he's preparing for a fight with Aliskerov. And what happens is, halfway through fight week, when Trocoli's halfway through his weight cut, he gets told to stop cutting weight, even though it's already complete, because Aliskerov has been put onto another card in Saudi Arabia against Robert Whittaker, because Chimaev pulled out against Whittaker. So now Trocoli has pretty much completed his weight cut. He's now extended a camp by 4 weeks as well from his Umar Sy fight. So he's got a camp extension for 4 weeks, which is never great. Then he's almost completed a weight cut and now doesn't fight. And it's not going very well for him. Then the UFC say, actually, we've got an opponent for you. Sharamagomedov's opponent, Jolton Lutterbach, has pulled out of his fight. I think it was due to doping issue, if I remember correctly. But he pulled out the fight, so there's a spot for you against Sharamagomedov. So now Trocoli's got to get back in shape. He's already done pretty much a full weight cut. Now he's got to do another weight cut whilst getting back in shape and travelling almost 20 hours across the globe to Saudi Arabia to fight Sharamagomedov. And look, I know he ended up running out of steam completely, but I actually don't blame him for everything that happened. And even in the moments where he was, he did have something in the gas tank, he was actually looking okay against Sharamagomedov. He wasn't winning the fight, but he was looking better than I think any of other Sharamagomedov's fights. So from a striking perspective, so look, I think Trocoli is better than what people in the market are sort of saying that he is. Like, even though he looks like a predominant striker, he's got a sneaky good grappling game. He can get takedowns. He'll take the back. He's huge as well. He's 6'5" with like an 80-inch reach, which is massive for the division. And then here he's fighting Trajan Gore. Now, Trajan Gore, in my opinion, is still green. Do I think that he's patched all his wrestling and grappling holes just because he wrestled and grappled Josh Fremd with an unorthodox choke to finish it off? No. Like, do I think he's improved? Yes. Like, it was quite a surprising fight. We didn't expect Trajan Gore to get 3 takedowns against Fremd and then submit him in round 2. But, you look at how that fight was going. Trajan Gore was wrestling heavy like I've just said, 3 takedowns. He was grappling, but the gas tank was draining because of it. And I actually think he's quite fortunate to have got the finish when he did, because if that fight had continued any longer, I think that Gore's gas tank would have gone. And with Trocoli, I think Trocoli, that's his game. Like, if Trocoli starts wrestling and grappling Trajan Gore, then I think he's absolutely going to be the better wrestler and grappler than Gore. And I think he's going to drain the gas tank. Then when you look at the striking, Gore's a good striker, he's dangerous. Again, new gloves. Does he knock Trocoli out? I don't think so. But if the striking battle plays out for extended periods of time, I don't think Trocoli's out of his depth with Gore. Like, yeah, Gore's a good striker, but he's still relatively green and developing himself in the game. Trocoli is going to be taller, longer, more physically built. He's got more experience in MMA. I think it's a good fight for Trocoli. I genuinely do. And I'm surprised that Trocoli is an underdog here. But he's only an underdog because of how Gore fought against Fremd. But I think that Trocoli is better than Fremd. So, again, I feel like I'm on an island on my own with Trocoli. I genuinely think he's better than the MMA fans, the public, that the betting markets portray him as. And yeah, I'm siding with him to win this fight. I'm picking Antonio Trocoli to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. So once again, as always, thank you for tuning in and listening. And as always, if you are listening on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, and you want to have a conversation, come over to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, please, as it really does help us, and it helps the channel in general on YouTube. And of course, dropping comments also helps the algorithm as well. So if you want to talk fights, if you want to tell me who you're betting on, where we disagree, how crazy I am about the Antonio Trocoli comments and statements. So yeah, just always available to have a fun time there. If you're an arse or if you've got a bit of an ego, the likelihood is I'm not going to respond to you, just because why should I? I can't be asked to give you my time. But yeah, any genuine comments, absolutely happy to have a chat. And yeah, that's all on youtube.com/MMA Play 365. And one last time before I go, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for everybody. Subscription packages are really cheap. They're all inclusive of absolutely anything. We don't split content up between different subscription packages apart from the Dog of the Week, but that comes with an insurance on there as well. If they both lose from the Dog of the Week, then we just give you your money back. It's as simple as that. But we've got plenty on there at MMAplay365.com to help you win some bets, have some fun whilst doing so, and enjoy the events. That's at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.